Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. Hope's life hangs by a thread as the story plunges headfirst into a terrible curl where power, preoccupation, and moral collapse collide, transubstantiating what once sounded like a particular contest into a life-or-death reckoning that shocks everyone involved. Because this script isn't simply about blackmail or treason but about how far one person is willing to go when control becomes more important than heart, and how another is forced to defy mortality itself when every escape route is designedly sealed, as Steffy's dark plot unfolds with nipping perfection, situating Hope not just as a victim of manipulation but as a woman directly and terrifyingly placed on death row, staying for an prosecution that may not involve needles or gallows but reports destroyed, futures cancelled, and a life totally disassembled piece by piece, since Steffy's blackmail is drafted with surgical atrocity, exploiting secrets, vulnerabilities, and institutional power in such a way that Hope is stripped of agency, voice, and safety, making every breath feel espoused and every moment charged with dread, because the brilliance and horror of the script taradiddle in how it frames Steffy not as a cartoon villain but as a calculating force who believes her conduct are justified, indeed righteous, satisfying herself that she's guarding commodity, her family, her heritage, her sense of control, while crossing every imaginable ethical line, thereby exposing the shocking verity that the most dangerous antagonists are frequently those who see themselves as icons, and as the narrative tightens its grip, Hope's fight for survival becomes both non-fictional and emblematic, a hopeless struggle against a system piled against her, against public perception twisted by falsehoods, and against a rival who understands precisely how to apply pressure until a person breaks. Since Steffy's blackmail isn't loud or impulsive but cold and regular, delivered through veiled pitfalls, precisely timed exposures, and the brewing pledge that if Hope steps out of line, everything she loves will be destroyed, leaving Hope insulated, hunted, and trapped in a cerebral captivity where every decision feels like choosing the manner of her own prosecution, and the script amplifies this terror by constantly asking whether survival is indeed possible when the rules are controlled by someone differently. When verity no longer protects you, and when innocence offers no guard, which is why the death row imagery resonates so forcefully, as Hope exists in a suspended state, not yet destroyed but forced to wake each day knowing that Steffy holds the switch that could end her life as she knows it at any moment, and this waiting becomes its own form of torture, stretching time into an unsupportable continuum of fear, remorse, and adaptability, as Hope renewals every once choice that led her then, questioning whether she was naive, too trusting, or simply unlucky to become the target of Steffy's wrath, while the followership is drawn into this cerebral preamble, feeling the claustrophobia of a woman possessed by a plot so dark that it leaves no room for mercy, because Steffy's conduct escalate from manipulation to outright moral atrocity, transubstantiating blackmail into an armament-able of killing dreams, connections, and individualities. And as the stakes rise, the script challenges the followership to grapple with uncomfortable questions about justice, power, and responsibility, asking whether someone like Steffy can be stopped. Formerly she believes she's untouchable, and whether Hope's survival will bear her to become someone she no way wanted to be, since every implicit escape demands an immolation that chips down at her integrity, forcing her to weigh survival against tone respect, and safety against verity. All while the shadow of prosecution looms larger with each fleeting scene, as deadlines are assessed, duns delivered, and the walls near in, and yet what makes this drama so compelling is that Hope isn't portrayed as unresistant or helpless but as a woman pushed to the point who sluggishly discovers a fierce, nearly feral will to live, a determination forged in fear but strengthened by love, memory, and the turndown to let Steffy define her ending, and this internal metamorphosis becomes the emotional chine of the script, as Hope evolves from prey into a fighter, indeed as the odds remain severely against her, because Steffy's plot isn't fluently unraveled, woven as it's through commercial influence, particular secrets, and social manipulation that ensures any attempt by Hope to expose the verity could boomerang catastrophically, making the trouble of prosecution feel horrifyingly real, since one wrong move could spark consequences that cannot be undone. And the script consummately maintains this pressure by denying easy palms, allowing small moments of stopgap to flare up only to be hovered again, buttressing the sense that survival isn't a single act but an ongoing battle, fought in rumored exchanges, hopeless crapshoots, and moments of raw emotional honesty, while Steffy's descent grows more pronounced, revealing how preoccupation with control erodes her humanity, as each step she takes to strain the mesh around Hope's neck distances her further from empathy, until her blackmail plot becomes lower about influence and further about domination. A need to see Hope broken as evidence of her own power, and this is where the story truly crosses every line, because it no longer concerns contest or vengeance but the obliteration of another person's actuality, and the script does end wince down from showing the collateral damage of this darkness, as families are torn piecemeal, alliances deteriorate, and onlookers are forced to choose sides, entwining them in Steffy's plot whether they like it or not, thereby expanding the moral compass of the drama and making Hope's fight for survival reverberate beyond her individual fate, emblematizing a broader struggle against abuse of power and the silencing of verity. And as the prosecution imagery intensifies, the followership is made to feel the unsupportable weight of staying, the ticking timepiece that counts down not to a physical death but to a moment when Hope may lose everything that makes her who she is, and yet within this suffocating darkness, the script shops seeds of resistance, moments where Hope's courage sparks mistrustfulness in others, where cracks begin to appear in Steffy's putatively impenetrable scheme, suggesting that indeed the most strictly planned blackmail plot cannot completely regard for the unpredictability of mortal heart, fidelity, and love, and this pressure between ineluctability and hope energies the narrative's instigation, keeping observers suspended between despair and expectation, as each scene threatens to be the one where the tropical prosecution eventually occurs, or where Hope manages to stay the blade at the last alternate, and by framing the story in similar extreme terms, death row, prosecution, life or death, the script underscores the emotional verity that for Hope the stakes couldn't be advanced, because survival isn't just about living but about reclaiming agency, quality, and the right to define her own story, while for Steffy, the plot becomes a glass reflecting the cost of unbounded power, revealing that in trying to destroy Hope, she risks destroying herself, her connections, and whatever moral ground she formerly claimed, making the drama not only thrilling but woeful, as it maps the collision course between a woman fighting for her life and another who has induced herself that crossing every line is justified, and in the end, whether Hope escapes prosecution or not, the script leaves an unforgettable print by forcing the followership to defy how fluently life can be placed on the line when secrets come, munitions, and power is applied without restraint, turning blackmail into a death judgment and survival into an act of defiance. As the story continues, the pressure doesn't release but mutates, heightening into commodity more sharp and dangerous, because formerly a life has been placed directly on death row. Survival is no longer just about avoiding the final blow but about enduring the cerebral corrosion that comes with dragged prison under fear, and Hope's actuality becomes defined by staying for the coming communication, the coming trouble, the coming precisely calibrated move from Steffy that reminds her how fully her fate is being controlled, as the script leans into the unsupportable literalism of sustained blackmail, showing how it fractures the mind over time, draining strength not through unforeseen violence but through grim pressure that no way allows the body or soul to rest, and Hope begins to feel as though she's living inside a preamble that only Steffy can see, where every smile is forced, every commerce is concentrated with dubitation, and every choice feels fatal, because Steffy's power lies not just in what she can do, but in what she might do, and the constant query becomes its own cutthroat, sluggishly suffocating Hope's sense of tone. Yet paradoxically, it's within this dragged suffering that Hope's metamorphosis accelerates, as fear sharpens her mindfulness and despair energies imagination, forcing her to observe Steffy not just as an adversary but as a system, predictable in her need for dominance, arrogant in her belief that no bone will challenge her, and decreasingly reckless as she pushes further once moral boundaries, induced that fear alone will keep Hope biddable, ignorant that fear can also enkindle resistance, and the script consummately tracks this shift, showing Hope still listing Steffy's patterns, her tells, the moments when control slips and emotion bleeds through computation, fading that Steffy's topmost weakness isn't compassion but hubris, the imperturbable belief that she's untouchable, which leads her to overplay her hand, tensing the mesh too aggressively, raising pitfalls too intimately, and drawing attention she assumes she can always deflect, while Hope, still trapped, still risked, begins to test the edges of her pen, not through open rebellion but through subtle defiance, asking questions that unhinge, planting dubieties that ripple outward, and making choices that save fractions of her integrity indeed when total freedom remains out of reach, because the script understands that survival under despotism frequently begins with reclaiming the lowest splints of agency, moments where one refuses to be completely cancelled, and as Hope does this, the death row imagery evolves, no longer representing only imminent destruction but also the quiet adaptability of someone who refuses to die still, indeed if the prosecution date remains unknown. And this elaboration unsettles Steffy, who senses the shift indeed if she cannot yet name it, responding with increased inflexibility, harsher duns, and darker tactics that push the plot into indeed more disturbing home, as Steffy's blackmail expands beyond Hope herself to jeopardize those around her, turning loved bones into influence and forcing Hope into insolvable moral dilemmas where guarding herself may mean immolating someone differently, and the atrocity of these choices underscores how fully Steffy has abandoned ethical restraint, transubstantiating from a strategist into commodity near to an cutthroat who believes that the end justifies any means, and yet, the further Steffy escalates, the more visible the cracks come, because absolute control is a vision that requires constant underpinning, and every new trouble leaves traces, substantiations, inconsistencies, emotional fallout, that cannot be entirely cancelled, allowing the script to sluggishly widen its focus, pulling secondary characters into the rout of the central conflict, characters who begin to notice that commodity is deeply wrong, that Hope's fear isn't paranoia but survival instinct, and that Steffy's jest has crossed from assertive to monstrous, creating a moral reckoning not just for the two women at the center but for everyone who benefits from Steffy's power while pretending not to see its cost, and this collaborative awakening is pivotal, because it reframes Hope's struggle from an isolated battle into a larger battle with systemic abuse, showing that blackmail thrives not only on secretiveness but on silence, and as that silence begins to fracture, the script tightens its grip again, reminding the followership that mindfulness doesn't equal action, and that indeed when people suspect the verity, fear and tone interest can keep them firmed, leaving Hope still dangerously exposed, still staying on her judgment, while Steffy adapts, shifting tactics to maintain dominance, portraying herself as the displeased party, weaponizing sympathy and perception to further insulate Hope, turning public opinion into another blade swimming over her neck. And this manipulation of narrative becomes one of the script's most nipping rudiments, as it demonstrates how fluently reality can be rewritten by those with enough influence, making Hope's innocence inapplicable in a world where power dictates verity, and yet indeed then, the story resists nihilism, because Hope's internal trip continues to consolidate, moving from raw terror toward a steadier, more deliberate resoluteness, as she accepts that survival may bear exposure, that the only way off death row may be to risk prosecution by stepping into the open, and this consummation is intimidating, because it means choosing between two kinds of death, the slow obliteration of tone under Steffy's control, or the explosive query of battle, but it's also liberating, because it reframes Hope not as a condemned internee awaiting fate, but as an active party in deciding how far she's willing to go to live, and the script gives this decision the weight it deserves, moping on Hope's mistrustfulness, guilt, and fear, admitting that courage isn't the absence of terror but the choice to act despite it, and as Hope begins to lay the route for resistance, the pressure shifts again, getting lower about whether Steffy will strike and further about who'll strike first, transubstantiating the narrative into a cerebral chess match where every move carries disastrous threat, and Steffy, seeing the trouble to her control, grows decreasingly deranged, her apologies unraveling as paranoia replaces confidence, revealing the true cost of her dark plot, as the power she sought to apply begins to consume her, segregating her from abettors, eroding trust, and exposing the bleakness beneath her tone-righteous narrative, because the script is grim in showing that crossing every line doesn't lead to palm but to decay, and Steffy's turn down to stop, to reassess, or to show mercy accelerates her downfall indeed as it heightens the peril to Hope, creating a unpredictable equilibrium where both women are locked in a mutually destructive rout, each decision amplifying the stakes, and the prosecution conceit returns with renewed force as deadlines impend, substantiation edges near to exposure, and Steffy issues what feels like a final claim, framing it as Hope's last chance to misbehave, her last walk to the gallows, and the followership is left breathless as Hope stands at this cliff, apprehensive that whatever choice she makes will permanently alter her life, but also apprehensive that survival without verity isn't survival at each, and it's then that the script achieves its most important thematic confluence, uniting the particular and the political, the emotional and the ethical, by asserting that life and death are and always decided by physical violence but by who controls the story, who defines guilt, and who's allowed to speak, and Hope's decision to fight back, whether through exposure, alliance, or immolation, becomes an act of recovery that transcends her individual fate, challenging the veritably structures that allowed Steffy's blackmail plot to flourish. And while the outgrowth remains uncertain, while the trouble of prosecution has not dissolved, the narrative makes one thing clear: Hope is no longer simply surviving under judgment, she's defying it, transubstantiating fear into purpose and staying into action, and in doing so, the script leaves the followership suspended in a state of agonizing expectation, completely apprehensive that the final chapters may still bring ruinous consequences, but also induced that whatever happens next, Hope won't go still, and Steffy, no matter how important power she wields, won't escape the reckoning she has so ruthlessly laid over, because formerly a life has been placed on the line so openly, formerly every moral boundary has been crossed, the only remaining question is whether there will be fallout. But who'll survive it, and at what cost? As the fate of Hope's decision to repel begins to ripple outward, the atmosphere of the story thickens with a new kind of peril, one born not just from fear but from ineluctability, because formerly defiance has been chosen, there's no returning to the vision of safety, and the script makes it sorrowfully clear that Hope has crossed an unnoticeable threshold where every step forward burns the ground behind her, leaving her completely exposed to Steffy's retribution, yet paradoxically more alive than she has been since the blackmail began, as the palsy of staying gives way to the raw clarity of action, and this shift reframes the death row conceit yet again, transubstantiating it from a symbol of unresistant suffering into one of last days and final trueness, where condemned captures occasionally speak most actually when they believe they've nothing left to lose, and Hope's honesty becomes her most dangerous armament, not because it guarantees protection, but because it threatens the precisely curated reality Steffy has constructed around herself, a reality that depends on silence, compliance, and the belief that power alone can bury wrongdoing. And as Hope starts to pull at the vestments of that vision, the narrative escalates into a high-stakes collision between verity and control, showing how violently systems reply when challenged from within, because Steffy doesn't simply respond with wrathfulness but with strategic ferocity, doubling down on her plot with an intensity that borders on despair, as if she senses that this is the moment where dominance must be absolute or lost ever, and the script captures this unraveling with nipping perfection, depicting Steffy's adding volatility, her pitfalls growing less measured, her confidence pigmented with fear, revealing that beneath the calculated surface lies a profound terror of exposure, of being seen not as the righteous protection she claims to be but as the mastermind of atrocity she has come, and this fear drives her to push indeed further beyond moral limits, making contingencies that jeopardize livelihoods, reports, and emotional well-being with reckless abandon, turning the world around Hope into a minefield where anyone who steps too close pitfalls being destroyed, and yet the more Steffy tightens her grip, the further the story emphasizes the unsustainability of absolute control, because every act of intimidation leaves residue, every taradiddle requires underpinning, and every trouble multiplies the number of people who know, suspect, or feel that commodity is wrong, and this accumulation of apprehension becomes a quiet corrective to Steffy's power, and turnabout of mistrustfulness that she cannot completely suppress, while Hope, acutely apprehensive that her window is narrow, moves with conservative urgency, forming fragile alliances erected on participated dubitation rather than complete trust, because the script refuses to glamorize resistance, admitting that those who choose to help Hope do so at great particular threat, frequently scrupling, second-guessing, or demanding evidence that she may not yet be suitable to safely give, buttressing the cruel irony that verity is most vulnerable when it needs protection the most, and through this lens, Hope's struggle becomes representational of anyone who has tried to expose abuse within important structures, where credibility is questioned, motives are scanned, and the burden of evidence falls unfairly on the victim, all while the trouble of retribution looms large, and the prosecution imagery resurfaces in subtler, more insidious forms, as Hope realizes that death doesn't have to be unforeseen to be complete, that erasure can do through insulation, unbelief, and prostration, And the script leans into this by showing the risk on Hope's body and mind, the insomniac nights, the hypervigilance, the moments where mistrustfulness creeps in and whispers that survival might be easier if she simply surrendered, if she accepted the judgment Steffy has assessed, but each time this temptation shells, it's combated by flashes of resoluteness, recollections of who Hope was before fear defined her, and fancies of who she could still be if she survives with her integrity complete. And these internal battles are as gripping as the external conflict, because they reveal that the true prosecution Steffy seeks isn't physical destruction but the breaking of Hope's spirit, the moment when Hope no longer believes she deserves freedom, and it's precisely this outgrowth that Hope now fights hardest to help, indeed as the stakes continue to rise, because Steffy, seeing the shift in instigation, begins to emplace her most ruinous armament yet narrative inversion, revamping Hope as the raider, the manipulator, the unstable trouble who must be contained for the lesser good. And this tactic is horrifyingly effective, as the script shows how fluently mistrustfulness can be planted, how snappily sympathy can be diverted, and how institutions designed to cover can be weaponized against those they suppose inconvenient, placing Hope in the intimidating position of being penalized not despite her innocence but because of it.